So Scott Monty, what the heck is the latest and greatest in social media and marketing these days, man? What are you working on? What's shaking?
Well, Phil, I got to tell you, what's new is old. You've heard the notion that those who do not study the past are condemned to repeat it. I think we're running into the same thing in digital and social, and it really comes from I think a lack of institutional memory. I'm seeing things repeated over again that we saw 8, 9, 10 years ago, stuff that we had to educate people on. And, as a professional communicator and marketer, consultant in that field, I'm finding it very difficult to simply go and, let's say, smack all the cockroaches. Let's go to the root of the problem, right? So rather than trying to correct these minutia of mistakes, I stepped back and I looked at the bigger picture, and I said, well, what's going on that is causing this? What is it that people are missing? And there's a few things going on. One, there's incredible pressure that people are up against right now. There's a daily drumbeat of requirements for content and to hit your numbers and to bring in leads and to make Wall Street satisfied, whether it's on a daily, weekly, or even quarterly basis, right? So we're unable to look at the bigger picture sometimes. The other thing is that we're seeing CMOs have a shorter tenure than ever, right? So they've got a limited time to make this kind of impact. And then at the same time, we've got staff that has had a huge turnover. So there's no institutional memory there to learn from the mistakes we've made before. So I look at this from a bigger picture perspective, and I realize that we're repeating not just the mistakes of the business and marketing space of the last 10 years, but of history. If you look throughout the course of recorded human history, we typically, I've got a call coming in the background, sorry about that. You typically see the same kinds of things happening over and over again. Why? Well, because humans are humans. We are still motivated by the same kinds of things. We still want the same kinds of things out of life. We want the same kinds of things out of relationships. And if we don't get that, then things take a sideways turn. So as a classics major, as an undergrad, I started looking back toward, what did I learn in literature and philosophy and drama and history, and even the history of business, to be able to take some great leadership lessons out of that and to apply them to what we're doing today. Because look, the platforms are going to change. I mean, we didn't have this kind of interaction on Facebook, even 5 years ago, let alone 10. So you have to be prepared for what's coming next. And without knowing what's coming next, the best you can do is look at human nature throughout history to give you the ability to predict what we need to be ready for in the future.
Yeah, I firmly believe, right? Those that learn not from the past are certainly condemned to repeat it. And there's a lot of lessons that we've seen throughout history, but it's interesting because you're uniquely qualified for this, Scott. I mean, the neoclassical digital executive, which is fascinating to me, right? You're the only classics major that's been a global head of digital and social for a Fortune 10 brand. And now you're an executive, right? You're a keynote speaker and you're an advisor. So tell me, like, as you look to the past, what's like one big thing, and then we'll talk about more of them, but what's the one big idea that you're seeing that's really kind of stuck in the past that should be brought forward?
Well, there's so many, really. So first of all, let me just say that people hear neoclassical advisor, they don't know what to make of it, right? That I'm the only classics major that's led a Fortune 10 brand in social. Okay, great. Now what do you do with that? Well, the point here is looking at the bigger picture and looking beyond just the confines of social and digital, right? Having been at Ford Motor Company on the corporate communications team leading social, that meant I was exposed to pretty much every department within the company. Product development, marketing, customer service, legal, IT, on and on and on. And you get a pretty good sense as to how a business runs and how strategy fits around all of that. And I think that's the most important part here, is understanding strategy. Because when you look back into history, you look at philosophy, you know, whatever, it's really about understanding strategy first, rather than simply going after all the tactics. You know, you think about the great battles in Roman history, in the history of the Roman Empire, an empire that lasted for 1,000 years. That didn't happen by accident, right? It happened by strategy. And even in the middle of their development, when it turned over from Julius Caesar's dictatorship, which, you know, irked a lot of people, enough so that a group of 12 of them got together and, you know, stuck a few daggers in him 44 times. That's an issue, right? So Augustus, who took over at that point, knew that the empire, the citizenry, needed a narrative. They need to understand how they fit into this bigger picture of the world that they understood. At the time, everybody knew the Iliad, right? This Greek epic about the Trojan War, lasted for 10 years. Well, Augustus got the poet Virgil to create a narrative for Rome and its founding, which actually traced its roots all the way up to Augustus, right? So Augustus was able to basically give himself some kind of connection to the gods as a result. And that's how the Aeneid was born. And it became the national narrative. It was a strategic move on Augustus's part to give people a story to anchor them to the Roman Empire, to give them more meaning and to give the society more meaning as a result. And there is actually, there's a book I just got, and I haven't started it yet. It's called Grand Strategies, right? And it's about literature, statecraft, and world order, right? And it's all about storytelling and authors and how we've actually used literature and philosophy and all the rest to establish not only companies, but countries as well. So it's a theme that we see throughout.
Wow. So storytelling being the central piece of that, it's no wonder that storytelling is central to so much marketing, right? I mean, if that's really where we're at, that's where we've been, that's where we're headed. So frankly, organizations that just want to send a few tweets or use a new weapon or tool, if you will, are going to lose to those that have the grander picture, that have the grander strategy around what they're going to do. How do they even get started, Scott, overcoming that? Because that is a mindset, right? That it's this quarter, right? I got to fix this, you know, oh, the quarter ends in 2 weeks. What do I do?
Right. And usually there's a rush. There's some kind of effort thrown at it. And the goal is just to get to that number, you know, and sometimes we forget what the broader business strategy is. Well, why are we doing this? What are we in business for? Who are we serving, right? And to understand all of the stakeholders involved. And that's why, you know, having a narrative, having a corporate strategy and a corporate vision with a very cleanly stated mission is so important. And, you know, we had that at Ford under the tenure of Alan Mulally as CEO, who would repeat that vision to us every email he sent, every town hall he hosted, every appearance on television. It was just that much a part of his DNA. And it was a very simple kind of narrative, you know, one Ford, one plan, one team, one goal. You know, that's it. And there was a narrative under each one, but it was distilled into that simple phraseology. Now, to get there, to get to that simplicity required a lot of hard work, a lot of heavy lifting, right? A lot of complexity. But it was understood that everybody in the company had a stake in that mission, right? And that's the thing. If you're, you know, charging toward this end of quarter, you know, deadline, it should tie back into what it is you're trying to do in the first place, rather than just mindlessly, you know, trying to do the same thing over and over again.
Interesting. So I certainly see how that can be helpful, right? That we tie that up, and if you have direct reports or you have people kind of in your up or down line, our goal then is to really create that connective tissue, which is often how that storytelling happens, right? That's to connect the big picture down to the micro level, so that it's what I'm doing today contributes to that mission. Is that right, Scott? Is that what you help organizations with, or what are you doing?
It really is. It's about it, and I know this phrase is overused, but I've been using it for 10 years myself. It's about humanization. How do we, and that's especially important now because we've gotten to the point over the last decade and a half online where we've become further separated from each other as humans. We've got this electronic wall between us that makes it easy to, get trolled on Twitter or, run into fake news and call it out on Facebook, as it were. And there's this level of humanity that seems to be lost, that we don't have the same kinds of communication online as we would in person, right? And I think people are missing that, right? And to the extent that you can make them not a number, not a figure on a screen, but a real human being, and acknowledge them for that, and build a relationship with them for that, and build a community around them, it's this whole pendulum swing that we're seeing. When social media first started out, we said, oh, it's about community. And then, it just grew by scale, and it's become an advertising medium for the most part, where brands talk at you, they interrupt you. You're very unlikely to see stuff in your feed that isn't algorithm based. When this is the time when people would appreciate a piece of direct mail, a handwritten note, an email or an email newsletter that's designed just for them, that will reach their inbox more reliably than a Facebook post, for example. So we're seeing in some ways, going back to not quite the Stone Age, but maybe the Bronze Age of marketing, where people need help in understanding some of these basics about what it means to be human and what people are looking for these days. And that's what I help businesses with.
Fantastic. Yeah, I was talking to my sales team this morning, and we're talking all about the sequencing of how we reach out to customers. But the key is, yes, the guts of the message, if you will, the thing that we want them to download that's going to add value to them. Okay, we might have marketing write that 3 sentences, but above that is human, below that is human, right? So we really have to humanize that. And the more we can inject our own personality into that and steer away from the faceless gray building, if you will, I think the more we win. And we absolutely are craving that, Scott. I mean, that's the difference between why Wendy's has 1 million followers and McDonald's has 1 million mockers, right?
Well, true. And that's an interesting example, Phil, because McDonald's was a client of mine a couple of years ago. And their view of Wendy's is, well, look at their logo. It's a little girl. Always snarky, always kind of nipping at McDonald's heels. And McDonald's has been very true to their brand. They try to remain upbeat and happy and, really take that kind of higher road. Whereas Wendy's, would you like a side of snark with your burger? And it's entertaining. I won't say it's endearing, but what you're going to get when you see Wendy's on Twitter. Here's the thing. If you were treated that way when you walked into a Wendy's, how would you feel?
Yeah.
If it became part of their corporate shtick, where you go, all right, I know somebody behind the counter is going to give me some lip. Great. Then that's consistent. Right. And I think people nowadays crave consistency in their brand experiences. Right. So look, the auto industry is the first detractor of this. Everything we did at Ford made us really progressive online. The Fiesta movement, which, my gosh, was 10 years ago now.
Holy cow. Where
we had 100 influencers and we gave them cars from Europe for 6 months. We shared all of their content live, unfiltered. That's really an evergreen case study when you think about it. And it's true today more than ever before as a great example. But that was showing how progressive Ford was. Well, you go to a dealership at that point, maybe after the close of the campaign in late 2009, and you're treated like it's 1974. That doesn't make sense. There's such a disconnect there between what you're seeing online and what you're seeing offline. And whether it's Wendy's or Taco Bell or, whomever, shtick is great for entertainment purposes, but how does it actually fit into the overall brand narrative?
Yeah, well, and how does it fit into the strategy, right? To your point of what you made earlier, if it's snark, so for instance, Ed DeBevick's, their brand was full on snark. I'm sure if they were still big now, they would absolutely be snarky on Twitter, snarky on Facebook, but you'd get that. And for me, I don't like that. I don't like the snark. In fact, I'm not a fan of the Wendy's brand. That's okay. But if that were consistent, that would make sense. But it ties up to that corporate strategy, right? Are we trying to embed that into the organization, or are we just trying to be smart so we can get people that follow me on social media?
Well, and here's the thing, Wendy's and Taco Bell, they've been very deliberate about what they do online. And look, I realize we're talking about, QSR, quick service restaurants right now as a category. You can apply this to whatever industry you want. But they did that very deliberately in the mind of going after younger customers. Now, great. Okay, if you've determined that younger people appreciate this kind of humor and the memes that you're doing and the clapbacks at your competition, great. However, how does that translate to sales? How does that translate to what you're trying to accomplish with your corporate brand? Are you just trying to increase word of mouth and hope that at that point you're going to see an offshoot that leads to further sales? Maybe, right? But again, tying that back to what the corporate goals are is so important. You remember about, 6 months to a year ago, IHOP changed the P in IHOP to a B. And there was a big reveal, they led up to it. And it turns out the B stood for burgers. Now, they had burgers on their menu. It wasn't widely known. So they used this as, again, a shtick, a PR stunt to drive more burger sales. Well, you know what? They saw a double of purchases of burgers at the restaurant. And what they've done just over the last week is actually pretty smart. They've gone back to that campaign. So they've created a consistency throughout. They identified all of the people online who were naysayers, who said, this isn't going to work out. It's just a stunt, etc. And they identified those people and put them on what they call the ban cake list. Right? Bancakelist.com, I think, is where you can find it. And if you put your Twitter handle in there and you talk snark about IHOP or IHOB the last time around, your name comes up on that list and they say, you're banned. You're banned from the store. But you can get into our good graces by saying something nice about us, right? And they've got a new launch of burgers. And they've got a burger with a pancake bun, like in between the other two buns. So there's a consistency there, and they're actually doing the old Jay Bear hug your haters kind of thing. It's pretty smart. It's pretty smart. So there's consistency there, and they've actually been able to see a lift in sales as a result.
Wow, I wasn't aware of that. That's great, and hopefully the employees at the store are aware of what's going on digitally, so that they can then, if they happen to see, maybe they see that tweet, right, and they notice location awareness. Now they can actually greet them and say, Scott, thanks for saying something nice about us after being a snarker, or something like that, right? Maybe you get a free cupcake or something.
Or even if corporate were to set up kiosks in all of the store, because it's hard for these managers and store employees to focus on the stuff that's going on online when they're really trying to do their best in store. But if they had a kiosk there where you can check in and put in your, log in with Google, log in with your Facebook ID or whatever, and the pancake list comes up and you're identified in that actual restaurant, who knows what they would do? Would they shoot you with confetti or, bring you a cupcake or whatever it is? I think there's lots of potential there.
Yeah, absolutely. So lots of stuff there. And if we take that to an organization, maybe that's more, even more brick and mortar perhaps, right? As people walk in, just identify your customers. My friends at AJ Bombers used to do this often, right? They'd recognize people based on social media. And this is like, you recognize your regular customers. Everything old is new again, huh, Scott?
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I'm a big fan of AJ Bombers because in Madison, they actually created the full Monty burger named after me.
Well, what was on it? I got to hear this.
Pretty much everything.
Excellent.
Bacon, egg, cheese, your choice of condiments. It was something.
Wow. I'm never that famous. I did happen to write a book with Joe Sorge, but I didn't get a burger named after me. So I'm going to have to talk to those guys because Joe sold the organization.
Go back to the well, ask him for one.
Well, Joe sold the company.
Oh, okay.
So, yep, Joe doesn't own it anymore, but yeah, we can tease him about that when we share this on social media a little bit. That Scott got a burger, I did not. What the heck is up with that? So, yeah. Well, let's talk about old and new as well. Let's talk about podcasting, Scott, because I started a podcast like 12 years ago, and I stopped and started and stopped and started, and now I'm doing this conversation with Phil, just talking with smart people like you, which I really enjoy. Because it's, the format is loose and we can talk about what we want. Hopefully those 7 people that listen enjoy it as well. But you had the Full Monty podcast, which was a lot of work, man. So what happened with that and what's next?
Yeah. So, I've been a podcaster for 13 years now. I started with a Sherlock Holmes podcast, which was really designed to help me just express myself within a hobby. And also to see how this new medium played out with more mainstream consumers rather than, talking, B2B kind of stuff to an audience that already understands it. So it taught me quite a good deal about audio production and editing and all the rest. And I realized at some point that I wanted to do a podcast for my own business, and I wanted it tied to my newsletter. Now, the Full Monty, which I have played with over time, became a roundup newsletter, a curated newsletter that just had so many stories in it. And I said, well, what if I took 15 minutes a week and just talked about a couple of the things there, a couple of the more salient stories of the week. And I did that as a live Sunday evening show on Facebook, and I would take that audio and I would make it into a podcast. Sunday evenings are tough. You're up against the Academy Awards and Game of Thrones, and everybody just preparing for Monday. So I stopped the live show, and then I took the audio podcast to just do those stories again, audio only. However, as I began to explore more of this historical, neoclassical kind of thing, I thought, well, I could do some storytelling here, almost like Paul Harvey, if you remember the rest of the story.
Favorite podcast of all time. Used to do it on the noon show, Scott.
Absolutely. So I said, well, what if I could shorten it to just 5 minutes, and do this major reveal about some business figure or historical figure, and then just, have that twist at the end and make it relevant to people. So I started doing that. Well, Phil, the challenge with that is coming up with a new story every week and producing it. When I'm traveling and I'm dealing with family and all the rest, it really became too much. In addition to the newsletter, in addition to new business development and client work, it's just too much for a single person to do. And I decided after 72 episodes to put a moratorium, a hiatus on the podcast. And I'm now in the midst of thinking about it from a series perspective or a seasonal perspective. I'm seeing a lot of podcasts, and Wondery is one of my favorite podcast networks. They've done things like Business Wars and Inside Jaws and The Shrink Next Door, where it's 6 or 7 episodes. It's all contained. There's a story arc that goes throughout all of those episodes, and you're able to close it down and then do another season whenever the time strikes you. So I'm starting to think about some of these examples, some of these historical instances, and putting those into a seasonal format for the Full Monty podcast rather than just week after week after week.
So it's going to be the neoclassical Monty. Is that what we're calling it? Or do you have a name yet?
I haven't picked it out yet. I talk a lot about timeless wisdom on my blog at scottmonty.com. And I think it may tie to that somehow. I haven't quite figured out exactly how it's going to be branded or what the narrative is going to be, but I want it to be something that's more universal, something that stretches beyond just marketing and communications leaders, which is an important audience, but I want it to be something that appeals to a more mainstream audience.
Awesome. That's fantastic. So we can look for that. What you think, probably in the fall?
I have no idea on the timing at this point. No promises.
That's fair. That's fair for sure, buddy. So cool. So we got hooked up 15 years ago on the Age of Conversation tour when that happened, and have hung out since then. So thinking back to that, I mean, was there anything back then that maybe that you predicted, Scott, that has come true, or maybe that has been completely erroneous in what you remember from way back then? And I know I'm asking you to jog your brain, but we put together what, 3 or 4 volumes of 80 to 150 different articles from different people. I'm curious, if you think back to the nascent early blogging years, what's the same and maybe what's different?
Well, I think the ecosystem in which we work now is much, much different. It's harder to get noticed and seen. It's harder to, I think keeping people's attention is the same. That's always been the case. It's harder to bring new people in, but once you have the people in that matter, I think there's that connection that's made. And again, I think we're seeing people go back to this. They're going back to blogging. They're going back to some of the basics, which to me is why it's so interesting that podcasting is taking off now, when to me it took off 14 years ago, back when iPods were a thing and iTunes came out. It's the very basics of storytelling, of talking to other people and being interesting to them. I mean, it sounds like a lot of platitudes, but the same kinds of things apply now. However, we have more ways of reaching other people potentially, and a lot of it's through paid advertising and sponsorships and whatnot. But I think it's more exciting than ever. So the thing is, trying to make sense of this all and to prioritize what matters for you and your audience is key, because you can't be everywhere. You used to be able to be everywhere because there weren't as many everywheres to be. And now you've got this whole universe of places to be. Pick a couple of platforms, pick a couple of things that make sense to you and most importantly to your audience, and be there and do it really well. I think that remains the same now more than ever before.
Awesome. Great advice. You can't be everywhere because there's more everywheres. So pick a couple platforms and go deep on that. That's great advice, Scott. So Scott Monty, if people want to connect with you more, what's your favorite place for them to connect with you besides obviously scottmonty.com, which is my favorite place to connect?
That's a good place to start. And that's where you can sign up for the newsletter and you'll get, the weekly Full Monty, which is a truncated roundup now. And it's a little more thoughtful. But again, it's designed to save you time and make you think. But Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, the 3 majors. I suppose we could throw Instagram in there, but I'm not as active visually because I don't have as many things to take pictures of as I used to when I was hanging out at the car track at Ford. So, LinkedIn and Twitter are great places, as well as my blog.
Awesome. Awesome. So folks, if you've never heard of Scott Monty, now you have. He is the neoclassical marketing genius from all over the place online. Connect with him on Twitter. He's Scott Monty on LinkedIn, Scott Monty everywhere. And I'm grateful that you, Scott Monty, are my friend. It was so good to talk to you, buddy.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Good to see you as always.
Good to see you, buddy.